My name is Jessica, and I am 22 years old. I grew up in a middle-class family in suburban Denver, Colorado, where the mountains create a stunning backdrop that I used to think represented endless possibilities. My parents, David and Margaret Chen Williams, are both successful professionals. Dad works as a senior architect for a prestigious firm downtown, while Mom runs her own marketing consultancy from our converted basement office. My younger sister Emma is 19 and currently in her sophomore year at Northwestern University in Chicago, studying communications with dreams of becoming a television producer. I should probably start by explaining how we got here, to this moment where I am sitting alone in my tiny studio apartment near the University of Colorado Boulder campus, staring at my diploma that arrived in the mail 3 weeks after my graduation ceremony. The ceremony my parents missed because they claimed they had a work emergency. The same parents who, just 6 months later, flew all the way to Boston to attend my sister's boyfriend's graduation from MIT. The irony is not lost on me that I am telling this story while surrounded by the very achievements they chose to ignore. My walls are covered with academic awards, honor society certificates, and photographs from my 4 years of college leadership positions. I graduated summa cum laude with a double major in biochemistry and mathematics, maintaining a 4.0 grade point average while working 20 hours a week at the campus research lab to help pay for my expenses. Let me take you back to the beginning of my senior year, September 2023. The leaves were just starting to turn golden on the campus quad, and there was that crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. I had just been accepted into 3 different graduate programs for biochemistry, including one at Stanford that came with a full research assistantship. I was also wrapping up my senior thesis on protein folding mechanisms, research that my advisor Dr. Martinez believed could contribute to Alzheimer's treatment development. I remember calling my parents that evening to share the news about Stanford. I was sitting on the worn wooden bench outside the chemistry building, watching students hurry past with their backpacks and coffee cups, everyone focused on their own academic journeys. "Mom, Dad, I got into Stanford," I said, when they both picked up the phone in their home office, something they always did for my important calls. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom replied, but I could hear her keyboard clicking in the background. "We're so proud of you." Dad chimed in with his usual practical questions about funding and timeline, but even as we talked, I sensed their attention was divided. Emma had called earlier that day with news that her boyfriend Marcus had been accepted to several graduate programs at MIT, and they had spent an hour discussing his options and celebrating his achievements. Marcus Rodriguez became part of our family dynamic when Emma started dating him during her freshman year. He comes from a wealthy Boston family, his father being a prominent surgeon, and his mother a federal judge. Marcus himself is undeniably brilliant, studying electrical engineering and computer science at Northwestern, with plans to eventually develop medical devices. He is also charming, well-spoken, and has the kind of effortless confidence that comes from never having to worry about money or approval. The contrast between how my parents responded to Marcus's achievements versus mine became a pattern I tried to ignore for months. When Marcus published a paper as an undergraduate, Dad forwarded the article to his entire office. When I published my research findings in a peer-reviewed journal, I had to bring it up 3 times before Mom finally acknowledged it during a rushed phone call. By November, I had made my decision to accept the Stanford offer. The program would start in August, giving me the summer to work as a research intern at the National Institute of Standards and Technology in Boulder, an opportunity that felt like the perfect bridge between undergraduate and graduate studies. I should have been ecstatic, but instead, I found myself feeling increasingly isolated from my family. Emma and Marcus had started making plans to spend winter break in Boston with his family, something my parents enthusiastically supported. They talked about it as a wonderful opportunity for Emma to experience East Coast culture and build relationships with Marcus's impressive network of family friends. Meanwhile, my own plans to spend winter break working on graduate school preparation and studying for the MCAT as a backup option were met with comments about how I worked too hard and needed to have more fun. The difference in their reactions crystallized during Thanksgiving dinner. We were all gathered around our dining room table, the same table where I had done homework throughout high school, while Mom helped Emma with her less challenging coursework. The late November light was filtering through our large windows, illuminating the carefully arranged centerpiece Mom had spent hours perfecting. Marcus was there, of course, having driven down from Chicago with Emma. He looked perfectly at ease in his expensive sweater, discussing his research internship plans with Dad, while Mom hung on every word. I had prepared to share updates about my own research and graduate school preparations, but every time I tried to contribute to the conversation, the focus somehow shifted back to Marcus's accomplishments, or Emma's latest campus activities. "Jessica, you've been so quiet," Emma said at one point, though she immediately followed it with a story about her sorority's philanthropy project. The moment that really stung came when Marcus mentioned his upcoming graduation in May. Without hesitation, Mom started talking about how excited they were to attend, how they had already started looking into flights to Boston and hotels near MIT. Dad jumped in with enthusiasm about finally seeing the campus and meeting Marcus's professors. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as I realized they were already planning this elaborate trip to celebrate Marcus's graduation, while my own ceremony, just 2 weeks earlier than his, had barely been mentioned in our family conversations. "What about Jessica's graduation?" Emma asked, and for a moment I felt grateful that she had noticed the discrepancy. "Of course we'll be there for Jessica too," Mom said quickly, but there was something perfunctory about her tone that made my chest tighten. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand why I felt so disappointed. The room still had my high school academic achievement certificates on the walls, reminders of a time when my parents seemed genuinely proud of my accomplishments. I had been the first person in our extended family to receive a full academic scholarship to college, but somehow that achievement had become overshadowed by Emma's social successes and her relationship with Marcus. Winter break came and went with Emma and Marcus in Boston, posting Instagram photos of their adventures at museums, restaurants, and family gatherings. I spent the time working on research applications and studying, occasionally joining my parents for quiet dinners, where they shared updates about Emma's exciting experiences on the East Coast. Spring semester arrived with an intensity that matched my growing anxiety about the future. I was juggling my final courses, completing my senior thesis, preparing for graduate school, and working at the research lab. The days blended together in a routine of early mornings, long hours in the laboratory, and late nights writing and studying. In March, I received confirmation of my graduation date, May 10th, 2024. The ceremony would be held at the Coors Events Center on campus, with tickets available for family members. I called my parents immediately to share the official date and request that they mark their calendars. "May 10th, Dad repeated, and I heard him writing it down. "We'll be there, of course." But even as he said it, there was a hesitation in his voice that made me wonder if they were already thinking about potential conflicts. Marcus's graduation was scheduled for May 24th, 2 weeks later, and I knew they were planning an entire weekend celebration in Boston. April brought an increased focus on final preparations. My thesis defense was scheduled for April 25th, and I spent every available moment refining my presentation and anticipating questions from the committee. Dr. Martinez had been incredibly supportive throughout the process, often staying late to review my work and provide feedback. She frequently mentioned how impressed she was with my dedication and the quality of my research. The thesis defense went better than I had hoped. The committee was genuinely engaged with my findings, and Dr. Martinez later told me it was one of the strongest undergraduate presentations she had witnessed in her 15 years of teaching. I walked out of the conference room feeling accomplished and validated in a way that I had not experienced in months. I called my parents immediately after the defense, eager to share the good news. Mom answered on the third ring, sounding distracted. "I passed my thesis defense," I announced, unable to contain my excitement. "That's wonderful, honey," she replied, but I could hear dishes clattering in the background. "I'm sorry. Can you hold on just a second? Emma is calling from Chicago." She put me on hold for nearly 10 minutes while she took Emma's call about some campus drama involving her sorority. When she finally returned to our conversation, the moment had lost its significance, and I found myself simply confirming that graduation was still on May 10th before ending the call. The weeks leading up to graduation were a whirlwind of final exams, last-minute thesis revisions, and job applications. I had been accepted to my top 3 graduate programs and needed to make a final decision by May 1st. The Stanford program remained my first choice, but I was also seriously considering offers from UC Berkeley and the University of Washington. I made my decision on April 28th, accepting Stanford's offer and officially committing to begin their doctoral program in biochemistry in August. The decision felt momentous, like I was finally stepping into the future I had been working toward for 4 years. I wanted to celebrate with my family, to feel their excitement and support as I embarked on this next chapter. When I called to share the news, both parents were on the line again, but this time they were clearly multitasking. Dad was reviewing architectural blueprints for a major project deadline, and Mom was responding to client emails. They offered congratulations, but the conversation felt rushed and superficial. "We're so proud of you, Jessica," Mom said. "Stanford is such an incredible opportunity." "It really is," Dad agreed. "You've worked so hard for this." But even as they said the right words, I could feel their attention was elsewhere. The call ended abruptly when Mom had to take another client call, leaving me sitting in my dorm room feeling more alone than celebrated. May arrived with the kind of perfect Colorado weather that makes you grateful to live near the mountains. The campus was buzzing with senior week activities, graduation preparations, and the bittersweet energy that comes with major life transitions. My classmates were excited about their families arriving for the ceremony, sharing plans for celebration dinners and weekend activities. I had assumed my parents would drive up from Denver on May 9th, the day before graduation, so we could have dinner together, and they could see my campus one last time. I had even made reservations at a nice restaurant downtown, imagining we would finally have time to really talk about my college experience and future plans. On May 8th, 2 days before graduation, I received a call that changed everything. "Jessica, we need to talk," Mom said, her voice carrying that careful tone she used when delivering disappointing news. I was in my dorm room, packing up 4 years of college life into boxes and suitcases. My roommate had already left for home, so the room felt particularly empty and echoing. "What's going on?" I asked, though something in her tone made my stomach clench with anticipation. "There's been a situation at work," she began. "Dad has a major client presentation that got moved to May 10th. It's a project he's been working on for 8 months, and if this presentation doesn't go well, the firm could lose the contract." I felt the room spin slightly as I processed what she was saying. "But graduation is May 10th. "I know, sweetheart, and we feel terrible about this, but this presentation could determine whether Dad makes partner this year. We can't afford to miss it." The irony was staggering. My parents, who had never missed a work deadline in their lives, were suddenly faced with an unmovable professional obligation on the exact day I was graduating summa cum laude from college. The coincidence felt too convenient, too perfectly timed to be purely accidental. "What about you, Mom?" I asked, grasping for some hope that at least one parent would be there. "I need to be there to support Dad," she replied. "This presentation is too important for our family's financial future." I sat in silence for several long moments, staring at my packed belongings and trying to process the enormity of what was happening. After 4 years of academic excellence, leadership positions, research achievements, and careful planning, I would be walking across that graduation stage completely alone. "We'll make it up to you," Mom continued, her voice brightening with false optimism. "We'll plan a special celebration when you get home. Maybe we can take a family trip this summer before you start at Stanford." But her promises felt hollow, especially knowing that in just 2 weeks, they would be boarding a plane to Boston for Marcus's graduation, an event they had been planning and anticipating for months. The next day, May 9th, I tried to focus on the positive aspects of graduation. I had achieved everything I had set out to accomplish in college. I was graduating with highest honors, I had been accepted to an elite graduate program, and I had conducted meaningful research that could contribute to medical breakthroughs. These achievements were real and significant, regardless of who was there to witness them. But as I walked around campus that evening, seeing other families arriving for the ceremony, I felt a profound sense of loss. Parents were taking photos with their graduates, siblings were exploring the campus, and grandparents were beaming with pride. The atmosphere was festive and celebratory, filled with the kind of family joy I had always imagined would surround my own graduation. I called Emma that night, hoping for some sisterly support during this difficult time. "I can't believe they're missing your graduation," she said, and for a moment, I felt validated in my disappointment. "It just feels like such a convenient excuse," I admitted. "Dad has had major presentations before, and they've never conflicted with family events." "Maybe you're reading too much into it," Emma replied, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced either. "You know how stressed Dad gets about work." "But they're planning this whole trip to Boston for Marcus's graduation," I said, finally voicing the comparison that had been eating at me for months. "That's different," Emma said quickly. "Marcus's family is hosting us, and it's a whole weekend event. Your graduation is just one day." Her words stung more than I expected. The implication that Marcus's graduation was somehow more significant or worthy of celebration than mine felt like a dismissal of everything I had accomplished. I ended the call feeling more isolated than before. Graduation morning arrived with brilliant sunshine and a gentle breeze that made the campus look postcard perfect. I put on my cap and gown in my empty dorm room, looking at myself in the mirror and trying to summon feelings of pride and accomplishment. The black gown hung perfectly, and the honor cords around my neck represented years of hard work and dedication. I walked to the Coors Events Center alone, joining thousands of other graduates and their families streaming toward the building. The energy was infectious, with music playing, photographers capturing moments, and an atmosphere of pure celebration. I tried to absorb that energy and make it my own, to find joy in this achievement regardless of who was there to witness it. The ceremony itself was beautiful and meaningful. The keynote speaker talked about resilience, the importance of pursuing meaningful work, and the responsibility we all have to use our education to make a positive impact on the world. When they called my name and I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I heard applause from my classmates and tried to imagine my parents in the audience, proud and cheering. Dr. Martinez found me after the ceremony, giving me a warm hug and congratulating me on my achievements. "Your parents must be so proud," she said, looking around expectantly. "They had a work emergency," I explained, the words feeling rehearsed after practicing them in my head all morning. Dr. Martinez's expression shifted to one of concern and disappointment. "I'm so sorry, Jessica. You deserve to have people here celebrating this incredible achievement." Her kindness almost broke me. I thanked her for everything she had done to support my academic journey and promised to stay in touch as I began graduate school. The rest of graduation day passed in a blur of campus farewell activities and packing up my remaining belongings. Other families were going to celebration dinners, taking countless photos, and making memories that would last forever. I spent the evening alone in my dorm room, looking through 4 years of photos and achievements, trying to process the mixed emotions of this milestone moment. I drove home to Denver the next morning, my car packed with boxes and my diploma carefully placed on the passenger seat. The 2-hour drive gave me time to think about everything that had happened and prepare for what I knew would be an awkward homecoming. My parents were both at work when I arrived home, despite knowing I would be returning after graduation. I carried my boxes up to my childhood bedroom and unpacked my diploma, placing it on the desk where I had done homework throughout high school. The house felt different somehow, like I was visiting a place from my past rather than returning home. When my parents arrived that evening, they made a show of congratulating me and asking about the ceremony. Mom had bought a small graduation cake from the grocery store, and they presented me with a card containing a check for $500. Their gestures felt obligatory, like they were checking items off a list of appropriate parental responses. "Tell us everything about the ceremony," Dad said as we sat in the living room eating cake. I described the keynote speech, the moment when I walked across the stage, and the conversations I had with professors afterward. They listened politely and made appropriate comments, but the conversation felt forced and uncomfortable. There was an underlying tension that none of us acknowledged directly. The real test of their priorities came exactly 2 weeks later. On May 24th, when Marcus graduated from MIT. The transformation in my parents' behavior was so dramatic that it felt like watching strangers inhabit their bodies. 3 days before Marcus's graduation, our house became a flurry of activity that rivaled wedding preparations. Mom took 2 days off work to shop for the perfect outfit, something she claimed was necessary because Marcus's family moved in prestigious social circles, and first impressions mattered. She visited 4 different department stores before settling on an expensive navy blue dress with matching accessories, spending more on this single outfit than she had on my entire graduation gift. Dad, meanwhile, spent hours researching Boston restaurants, MIT campus history, and conversation topics that would impress Marcus's surgeon father. He bought a new suit, got a haircut, and even purchased a book about medical device innovation so he could engage meaningfully with Marcus's academic interests. The level of preparation was meticulous and intentional, representing the kind of effort I had never seen them put into any event related to my achievements. The night before their departure, I found them in the living room, surrounded by printed airline confirmations, hotel reservations, restaurant bookings, and a detailed itinerary Mom had created for their 3-day Boston trip. They had booked a room at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, one of the city's most luxurious hotels, and made reservations at 3 different high-end restaurants, including one specifically chosen because Marcus's family frequented it. "This is quite an elaborate trip," I observed, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the growing resentment I felt. "Well, it's not every day that Emma's boyfriend graduates from MIT," Mom replied, not looking up from her packing checklist. "This is a really important milestone for him, and we want to show our support for their relationship." The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. My graduation from college with highest honors, my acceptance to Stanford, my groundbreaking research that could contribute to Alzheimer's treatment development, none of these achievements had warranted a single day off work, let alone a 3-day luxury vacation. "Plus, it's a great opportunity for us to spend time with Marcus's family," Dad added, folding his new suit carefully into the suitcase. "His father is one of Boston's most respected surgeons, and his mother is a federal judge. These are the kind of connections that could benefit Emma's future." I watched them pack with a mixture of fascination and disgust. Every item they placed in their suitcases represented thoughtful consideration for this event that they considered worthy of their time, money, and emotional investment. The contrast with their absence from my graduation was so stark that I wondered if they even recognized their own hypocrisy. "You know," I said carefully, "I can't help but notice that you found a way to take time off work for this graduation." Mom looked up from her packing, and for a moment I saw something like guilt flash across her face, but it was quickly replaced by defensiveness. "This is completely different, Jessica," she said. "This trip was planned months in advance, and we're not just attending a graduation ceremony. We're meeting Marcus's extended family, and there are multiple social events throughout the weekend. My graduation was also planned months in advance," I pointed out. "The date was set in December. Your father's client presentation was genuinely unavoidable," she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Sometimes work emergencies happen at the worst possible times." Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We already explained all of this, Jessica. There's no point in rehashing it now." "No, but I was beyond caring about making them uncomfortable. 2 weeks of processing their absence from my graduation had crystallized my understanding of exactly where I stood in their priorities, and their enthusiastic preparation for Marcus's celebration was confirmation of everything I had suspected. "I'm just trying to understand," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Dad's architecture firm has multiple partners and dozens of employees. Surely someone else could have handled one client presentation, but Marcus's graduation requires both of you to fly across the country for 3 days. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged glances that contained entire conversations, the kind of wordless communication that comes from 25 years of marriage and shared decision-making. "We care about both you and Emma equally," Mom finally said. "But Emma's relationship with Marcus is at a crucial stage, and it's important for us to show support for their future together." Her words hit me like a physical blow. She was essentially admitting that they valued Emma's romantic relationship more than my academic achievements. In their calculation, being present for Marcus's graduation was an investment in Emma's future happiness, while my own milestone was somehow less significant. I excused myself from the room before I said something I would regret. In my bedroom, I sat on my bed staring at my diploma, which was still propped against my desk lamp, where I had placed it after returning from Boulder. The irony was overwhelming. I had achieved everything they had always claimed to want for me: academic excellence, admission to an elite graduate program, research opportunities that could lead to meaningful scientific contributions, and yet none of it seemed to matter when compared to their desire to impress Marcus's wealthy family. The next morning, I drove my parents to Denver International Airport. The car ride was tense and awkward, filled with forced conversation about their flight schedule and Boston weather forecasts. As I watched them check in for their flight to Boston, wheeling expensive luggage and discussing their detailed weekend plans, I felt something fundamental shift in my relationship with them. "We'll call you when we get to the hotel," Mom said, as we stood at the security checkpoint. "Have a wonderful time," I replied, and I meant it in the most bitter way possible. I drove home through Denver's morning traffic, feeling simultaneously liberated and devastated. For the first time in my life, I was completely free from the need to seek their approval or validation. Their absence from my graduation and their enthusiastic presence at Marcus's had clarified exactly where I stood in their emotional hierarchy. Over the next 3 days, I received regular updates about their Boston adventure. Text messages filled with photos of MIT's campus, the graduation ceremony, fancy restaurants, and family gatherings. Emma posted Instagram stories of their activities, showing my parents laughing and celebrating with Marcus's family, looking more relaxed and happy than I had seen them in years. The most painful post came on Saturday evening, a group photo of both families at an elegant restaurant, everyone dressed beautifully and smiling broadly. The caption read, "Celebrating our brilliant graduate with the most amazing families." My parents looked genuinely joyful, like they were exactly where they wanted to be, participating in exactly the kind of celebration they valued. I spent that weekend cleaning out my childhood bedroom, packing up belongings I wanted to take with me to California, and mentally preparing for the new chapter of my life that would begin at Stanford. The physical act of sorting through years of possessions was therapeutic, helping me process the emotional work of separating myself from my family's expectations and priorities. On Sunday afternoon, I received a phone call from Dr. Martinez, my undergraduate research advisor. She had been thinking about our conversation after graduation and wanted to check on how I was adjusting to post-college life. "How are your parents feeling about your Stanford acceptance?" she asked. "They must be incredibly proud." "They're supportive," I said, which was technically true in the most minimal sense. "I have to tell you, Jessica, in 15 years of teaching, I rarely see undergraduate students with your level of dedication and intellectual curiosity. Your research could genuinely contribute to breakthrough treatments for neurodegenerative diseases. That's the kind of work that changes lives." Her words meant more to me than she could possibly know. Here was a respected scientist, someone who had dedicated her career to meaningful research, telling me that my work mattered. The validation I had been seeking from my parents was available from people who actually understood the significance of my achievements. "Thank you, Dr. Martinez," I said. "That means everything to me." "Have you considered submitting your thesis research for publication in a peer-reviewed journal?" she asked. "I'd be happy to collaborate with you on preparing it for submission." The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but as she explained the process and potential impact, I felt a surge of excitement that had nothing to do with my family's approval. This was my work, my contribution to scientific knowledge, and my opportunity to make a meaningful difference in the world. My parents returned from Boston on Sunday evening, full of stories about their wonderful weekend. They had clearly bonded with Marcus's family, been impressed by MIT's campus and academic reputation, and thoroughly enjoyed playing the role of proud, almost in-laws at various celebration events. "Marcus's father is absolutely brilliant," Dad said as they unpacked their suitcases. "We had such fascinating conversations about the intersection of engineering and medicine, and his mother has incredible insights into the legal aspects of healthcare policy." "They treated us like family," Mom added. "We're already planning to have them visit Denver this summer. They want to see the mountains and experience Colorado culture." I listened to their enthusiastic recounting with a mixture of fascination and detachment. They were describing the kind of weekend they had never planned for any of my achievements, complete with multiple social events, meaningful conversations, and future relationship-building plans. "How was Marcus's actual graduation ceremony?" I asked. "Oh, it was absolutely beautiful," Mom replied. "MIT's campus is so historic and prestigious. The keynote speaker was a Nobel Prize winner, and the whole atmosphere was just electric with accomplishment and possibility." The description was remarkably similar to my own graduation ceremony, except that they had been there to witness and appreciate Marcus's version. The difference wasn't in the events themselves, but in their willingness to show up and engage meaningfully with the celebration. "We got some beautiful photos of Marcus receiving his diploma," Dad said, pulling out his phone to show me the pictures. His whole family was so emotional and proud. As I looked at the photos, I saw my parents in the crowd, clapping and smiling with genuine joy. These were the faces I had imagined seeing in the audience at my own graduation, the expressions of pride and celebration that I had hoped would mark my own academic achievement. That night, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my relationship with my family. I was done seeking their validation, done trying to compete with Emma and Marcus for their attention and approval, and done pretending that their choices didn't reveal their true priorities. I started making concrete plans for my future that didn't depend on their support or involvement. I would move to California in July, a month before my Stanford program began, to get settled and start working with my graduate research advisor. I would fund this transition using money I had saved from my undergraduate research position, rather than asking my parents for help. More importantly, I would build relationships with people who valued the same things I valued: intellectual curiosity, scientific discovery, meaningful work, and genuine accomplishment, rather than social connections and impressive family networks. The summer passed quickly as I prepared for graduate school and emotionally distanced myself from my family's dynamics. Emma and Marcus visited Denver twice, both times accompanied by elaborate family dinners and social events that showcased my parents' investment in their relationship. I attended these gatherings politely, but remained detached, observing rather than participating in the family dynamic I had once desperately wanted to be central to. In July, I drove to California alone, my car packed with belongings and my future full of possibilities that had nothing to do with my family's approval. Stanford's campus was everything I had hoped for: intellectually stimulating, research-focused, and filled with people who cared more about scientific contribution than social status. My graduate advisor, Dr. Sarah Chen, welcomed me into her research group with the kind of enthusiasm and respect I had been craving. She was genuinely excited about my undergraduate research and had specific ideas about how to expand it into doctoral-level work that could have real clinical applications. "Your work on protein folding mechanisms is exactly the kind of research we need to advance Alzheimer's treatment," she told me during our first meeting. "I think you have the potential to make significant contributions to this field." Working in Dr. Chen's lab felt like coming home to a place I had never been before. My colleagues were brilliant, dedicated, and supportive in ways that made me realize how starved I had been for intellectual community. We spent long hours discussing research problems, challenging each other's assumptions, and collaborating on projects that felt genuinely meaningful. 3 months into my first semester at Stanford, I received news that validated every choice I had made about prioritizing my academic goals over my family's social priorities. Dr. Martinez called to tell me that our collaborative paper based on my undergraduate research had been accepted for publication in the Journal of Biological Chemistry, one of the most prestigious publications in the field. "Jessica, this is incredible," she said. "Having a first author publication in JBC as a graduate student is virtually unheard of. This is going to open doors for you throughout your career." I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of accomplishment and validation that was entirely independent of my family's recognition or approval. My work mattered, my contributions were valued, and my future was bright regardless of whether my parents understood or appreciated what I was achieving. I called home that evening to share the news about the publication, expecting at least some acknowledgement of this significant achievement. Mom answered the phone, and I could hear Emma chattering in the background about wedding planning details. Apparently, Marcus had proposed during a romantic weekend in Napa Valley, and the family was already deep into discussions about venue options and guest lists. "Mom, I have some exciting news," I said, trying to interrupt the wedding conversation. My research paper was accepted for publication in one of the top journals in biochemistry. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she replied distractedly. "Hold on just a second. Emma is showing me photos of potential wedding venues." She put me on hold for several minutes while she discussed catering options and floral arrangements with Emma. When she finally returned to our conversation, the moment had lost its significance, and I found myself simply confirming that I was doing well in graduate school before ending the call. The contrast was devastatingly familiar. My scientific achievement, which represented years of work and had significant implications for medical research, was overshadowed by Emma's engagement party planning. Once again, I was reminded that my accomplishments, no matter how meaningful or impressive, would always take second place to Emma's social milestones. But this time, instead of feeling disappointed or seeking validation, I felt liberated. I had found my place in the world of scientific research, surrounded by people who understood and valued the work I was doing. I no longer needed my family's approval to feel proud of my achievements or confident in my future. The engagement party took place in December, during my winter break from Stanford. My parents spared no expense, hosting an elaborate celebration at the Denver Country Club, with over 100 guests, including Marcus's family who flew in from Boston. The event was everything my graduation had not been: carefully planned, well-attended, and treated as a major family milestone worthy of significant investment and celebration. I attended the party as a polite but detached observer, watching my parents play the role of proud future in-laws to Marcus's impressive family. They introduced him to their friends and colleagues as their brilliant future son-in-law, highlighting his MIT education, his engineering expertise, and his promising career prospects. When people asked about me at the party, my parents would mention that I was in graduate school at Stanford, but the conversation quickly shifted back to Emma and Marcus's engagement story, wedding plans, and future together. My scientific research, my academic achievements, and my potential contributions to medical breakthroughs were footnotes in the family narrative that centered around Emma's romantic success. Standing in that country club ballroom, surrounded by celebration and family pride that had never been directed toward my achievements, I finally understood something crucial about family dynamics and personal worth. Some people will never value what you have to offer, no matter how significant or meaningful your contributions might be. The key to happiness and fulfillment is finding the people who do recognize and appreciate your unique gifts, rather than continuing to seek validation from those who have already shown you where their priorities lie. 6 months later, I achieved something that should have been a source of immense family pride. I was awarded a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship, one of the most prestigious and competitive fellowships available to graduate students in STEM fields. The fellowship came with 3 years of funding for my doctoral research and was considered a strong predictor of future success in academic and research careers. Dr. Chen was ecstatic when I told her the news. "Jessica, this is extraordinary," she said. "NSF fellowships are incredibly competitive. This recognition means the scientific community sees the same potential in you that I've been seeing. This is going to accelerate your research and open up opportunities you can't even imagine yet." My colleagues in the lab threw an impromptu celebration, complete with champagne and congratulations from other research groups in the building. The validation from the scientific community was overwhelming and meaningful in ways that family approval had never been. When I called home to share the news, I reached my parents during one of their regular conference calls with Emma about wedding planning. The ceremony was scheduled for June, and every family conversation had become consumed with details about flowers, music, catering, and honeymoon plans. "I won the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship," I announced when they finally focused on our call. "That's fantastic, Jessica," Dad said. "What exactly does that mean?" I explained the significance of the fellowship, the competitive selection process, and the opportunities it would create for my research career. They listened politely and offered appropriate congratulations, but I could sense their attention was divided, and the conversation quickly shifted to logistics about my travel arrangements for Emma's wedding. The wedding itself was a lavish affair that represented everything my parents valued: social status, impressive connections, and public celebration of success they understood and appreciated. Emma looked beautiful. Marcus was charming and gracious, and both families seemed genuinely delighted with the union they were celebrating. During the reception, I found myself talking with Marcus's father, Dr. Rodriguez, about my research. As a surgeon, he had genuine interest in the medical applications of my work on protein folding and neurodegenerative diseases. "Your research could have significant implications for surgical interventions in Alzheimer's patients," he said. "Have you considered the clinical applications of your findings?" It was one of the most engaged conversations I had ever had with anyone in my extended family network about my work. The irony was not lost on me that Marcus's father showed more interest in my research than my own parents ever had. "You should be incredibly proud of Jessica," Dr. Rodriguez said to my parents later that evening. "Her work at Stanford is exactly the kind of research that leads to medical breakthroughs. You're raising a future leader in biomedical science." I watched my parents' faces as Marcus's father praised my achievements. They looked pleased but somewhat surprised, as if they were hearing about my potential for the first time from someone whose opinion they respected. It was a moment of recognition that came through Marcus's family, rather than from their own understanding of my accomplishments. As I flew back to California after the wedding, I reflected on how much my relationship with my family had changed over the past year. I no longer sought their approval or felt disappointed by their lack of recognition. Instead, I had built a life filled with meaningful work, supportive colleagues, and genuine appreciation for the contributions I was making to scientific knowledge. My research was progressing beautifully under Dr. Chen's guidance. We were investigating new approaches to protein stabilization that could slow or prevent the neural degeneration associated with Alzheimer's disease. The work was challenging, intellectually stimulating, and potentially life-changing for millions of patients and families affected by neurodegenerative diseases. In September of my second year at Stanford, I received an invitation that validated every choice I had made about prioritizing meaningful work over family approval. The National Institutes of Health invited me to present my research at their annual symposium on aging and neurodegeneration, an honor typically reserved for established researchers rather than graduate students. Dr. Chen was thrilled. "Jessica, this invitation is recognition that your work is already making waves in the research community," she said. "Presenting at NIH as a second-year graduate student is virtually unprecedented." The presentation went exceptionally well, with several leading researchers approaching me afterward to discuss potential collaborations and future research directions. One particularly exciting conversation was with Dr. Angela Foster, a senior scientist at the National Institute on Aging, who was interested in translating my basic research findings into clinical trials. "Your approach to protein stabilization could be exactly what we need for the next generation of Alzheimer's treatments," she told me. "Would you be interested in spending a summer working with our clinical research team?" The opportunity felt like everything I had been working toward: meaningful research with direct clinical applications, collaboration with leading scientists, and the potential to contribute to treatments that could help millions of people. I accepted the internship immediately, knowing it would accelerate my career in ways I had never imagined possible. When I called home to share this extraordinary opportunity, I reached my parents during another family conference call, this time focused on Emma's pregnancy announcement. She and Marcus were expecting their first child, and the family was consumed with excitement about becoming grandparents. "I've been invited to spend the summer working at the National Institutes of Health," I said, when they finally turned their attention to our call. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom replied, but I could hear Emma talking in the background about nursery decorating plans. I tried to explain the significance of the NIH internship, the potential clinical applications of my research, and the career opportunities this collaboration would create. They listened politely, but seemed more interested in discussing baby names and nursery themes with Emma. The conversation ended with them asking when I would be able to visit to help with baby preparations, as if my research career was something I could easily set aside to focus on family obligations. Once again, I was reminded that my achievements, no matter how significant, would always be secondary to Emma's life milestones in their hierarchy of importance. But this time, their lack of engagement didn't hurt. Instead, it confirmed that I had made the right choice in building my life around work that mattered to me, and relationships with people who understood and valued my contributions. My identity was no longer dependent on their recognition or approval. The NIH internship exceeded every expectation I had. Working with Dr. Foster's team, I contributed to research that was already moving toward clinical trials. My protein stabilization techniques were incorporated into experimental treatments that showed promising results in laboratory studies, bringing us closer to therapeutic interventions that could help Alzheimer's patients and their families. "Jessica, your work is going to save lives," Dr. Foster told me during my final week at NIH. "I hope you'll consider continuing this collaboration throughout your doctoral program and beyond." As I prepared to return to Stanford for my third year of graduate school, I felt a sense of purpose and accomplishment that was entirely independent of my family's understanding or appreciation. I had found my calling in biomedical research, built relationships with mentors and colleagues who valued my contributions, and was making progress toward discoveries that could have real impact on human health and suffering. The contrast with my family's priorities had become irrelevant. While they celebrated social milestones and focused on impressive connections, I was engaged in work that addressed fundamental questions about human disease and developed potential treatments for conditions that affected millions of people worldwide. Looking back on the journey from my parents missing my graduation to building a meaningful career in scientific research, I realized that their absence from that ceremony had been a gift, though a painful one. It forced me to seek validation from sources that truly understood and appreciated my work, rather than continuing to pursue approval from people who would never value what I had to offer. My research continues to progress. My career opportunities continue to expand, and my sense of purpose grows stronger every day. I have built a life filled with meaningful work, supportive relationships, and genuine appreciation for the contributions I am making to scientific knowledge and human health. Sometimes the greatest gift our families can give us is the clarity that comes from their absence at our most important moments. That clarity helps us understand where to invest our energy, whose approval to seek, and how to build lives that reflect our own values, rather than their expectations. My name is Jessica. I am 24 years old now, and I am exactly where I belong. In a laboratory, surrounded by people who value discovery over social status, working on research that could change lives, rather than seeking approval from people who will never understand what truly matters to me, and that is more than enough.